Hello and welcome to this US figure skating video tutorial on how to work with IJS Deductions for manual entry. My name is Robert Keene and I am the IJS Technology Specialist for US figure skating. In this lesson we will discuss the upcoming changes to the IJS deduction factors and how they affect manual entry in ISUCalc. Along the way we'll learn how ISUCalc uses both the entered deduction value and the factor to calculate the points deducted. Prior to the 2015-16 competition season, all deduction factors in ISUCalc were 1.0. This effectively meant that the deduction value entered reflected the actual points deducted. During the 2015-16 season, points deducted for falls at the intermediate, adult, and lower levels were changed as follows. The point value was reduced to a half point. This was implemented in ISUCalc by changing the deduction factor to 0.5. The deductions were still entered as 1, and ISUCalc would then apply the factor and deduct a half point for each fall. This was transparent to the accountant entering the deduction since the entry of 1 per fall had not changed. In the 2016-17 season, these additional deduction changes are being implemented. Novice singles falls are also now worth a half point and will be implemented in ISUCalc with a 0.5 factor. This change can be found under item 356 in the Combined Report of Action from the 2016 Governing Council. For intermediate singles, pairs, and dance, adult and lower levels, time violations are now worth a half point and will be implemented with a 0.5 factor. This change can be found under item 329 in the Combined Report of Action. For intermediate dance, adult gold and adult pre-gold, and lower dance levels, music requirement violations are now worth 1 point and will be implemented with a 0.5 factor. This change is under item 336 in the Combined Report of Action. What this means for manual deduction entry is that we can no longer assume that the deduction value, that is, the value that we enter into ISUCalc, will always equal the points deducted, as used to be the case. Obviously, if the deduction factor is something other than 1.0, the value entered will be different from the points calculated. For this reason, when entering deductions manually, do not enter the points deducted. Instead, enter the deduction value. To aid with this, we've created an IJS Deductions reference sheet, which will be made available on Accounting Central. This sheet lists all the deductions and includes a field named Entered Value, showing what the correct value is for each deduction. Use this field when manually entering deductions. When proofing, you can use the point value fields, but again, do not use point values for entering deductions. Only use the entered value field. Finally, the chart shown in this video is a prototype and may look a little different from the finished version that you will find on Accounting Central. Let's take a closer look at what's happening behind the scenes. ISUCalc uses the following formula to calculate deductions. Deduction value times deduction factor equals points deducted. Also, you want to treat the values as a single occurrence. So for deductions that can be applied more than once, such as falls or time violations, increment by the entered value. If a skater falls 3 times during your program, the deduction value entered will be 3, 1 for each occurrence. However, this may or may not calculate as a 3-point deduction. For junior and senior, it will calculate 3 points due to using a factor of 1.0. For novice singles and lower, however, it will calculate a 1.5 point deduction. This is where we have to be careful to use deduction values because we're all used to a 1-to-1 correlation between the values entered and the points. If I'm thinking in terms of points when entering deductions, I might be tempted to enter 1.5 points for 3 falls in a novice singles program, but that will result in an error in the final results. To demonstrate this, let's enter 3 falls into a novice lady's program. Because there are 3 falls, I want to enter 3 occurrences. Save and check, click OK, and you'll notice that the Elements window shows that there have been 3 falls entered. Now it's important to understand that in the Elements window, any deductions that you see down here will show what you have entered, not the point value. That's important to understand or it can throw you off. Now let's take a look at the actual points that ISCalc calculated. To do that, we have to go into the judge's scores and see the judge's detail report. Now you can see that ISCalc deducted 1.5 points for 3 falls in a novice lady short program, which of course is correct because of the factor of 0.5. To see the deduction factors in ISCalc, you'll need to go into Edit Segment, Parameters. Here, you'll see the deductions set for this segment in the Deductions column, and the factors set for each deduction. Because this is a novice ladies segment, you'll notice that falls are set to 0.5. Let's say that I'm thinking in terms of point value instead of entered value. And I know that on a novice ladies program, 3 falls are worth 1.5 points. So I enter 1.5 points into the falls deduction field. And if I'm also not aware that the Elements window shows entered value and not point value, I may falsely reassure myself that I've done this correctly. Let's see, however, what the results say. On the results report, we can see that ISCalc only calculated 3/4 of a point for 3 falls, and that's obviously incorrect. Up to this point, everything we've discussed was probably straightforward. All we need to do is enter the deduction value and let the factor take care of the final points. However, the situation becomes a little tricky in that not all deduction values are represented by a 1 for each occurrence. By default, ISCalc uses a deduction factor of 1 for all deductions. Any deduction that is more or less than 1 point and has not had its factor adjusted by our US update will need to be entered by point value. These include the following deductions. Illegal element and music requirement require an entered value of 2 for each occurrence. Why? Because the default factor is 1, but 2 points are deducted for these violations. Likewise, Synchro's repeated element shape and additional element use an entered value of 1.5 for each occurrence for the same reason, and wrong shape requires an entered value of 0.5 for each occurrence. So you might be thinking, why don't we change the factor on these deductions as well? Well, it's because it's currently not possible to change deduction factors for junior and senior in our US software release. It's also the way the ISU currently implements deductions and how the officials are used to entering deductions at ISU level competitions. Now, it is possible to change the factors manually after the database is built, but don't do this. These changes should be automatically built into the software for consistency at all US competitions, not to mention that it would be extra work for the accountant and error-prone. A request will be submitted to the ISU and Swiss Timing to change how deductions work in future releases of the software. Next, let's take a quick look at majority deductions, and in particular the music requirement violation. As the name implies, majority deductions require the majority of judges, along with the referee, to vote for the deduction to be applied. If the majority votes yes, the deduction value is multiplied against the factor to calculate the deducted points, just like regular deductions. These deductions are entered from the judge's score screen in ISCalc and, like regular deductions, require the correct deduction value when inputting. Let's take a look and see how this works. From Run Event, click on the Judge Data button to open up the Judge's Score window. Along the bottom, you'll see where the majority deductions are entered. For this demonstration, let's say that Judge 1, Judge 2, and Judge 4 all voted for costume prop violation. And let's say that Judge 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and the referee all voted for music requirements violation. Notice too that music requirements violation requires an input value of 2. We'll discuss this more in a moment. Now you can see that ISUCalc did not apply the costume prop violation because only 3 out of 7 judges voted for this. But the music requirements violation indeed will be applied because the majority voted for it. Also note that the majority deductions are listed in the top portion of this screen, but this is only showing you how many votes each deduction received. The deduction will only be applied if it appears in the lower section. We have a special case with the music requirements violation deduction, as it not only requires a deduction value of 2, but it also uses different factors depending upon the level. Novice, junior, and senior dance uses a factor of 1.0. Intermediate and lower dance uses a factor of 0.5. Regardless of level, you still always enter this deduction with a value of 2 for each judge that votes for it. So in the case of, say, senior dance, if the majority of judges vote yes, you will enter a 2 for each judge, and then ISUCalc will multiply minus 2 by a factor of 1.0 to calculate a 2-point deduction. In the case of intermediate dance, ISUCalc will multiply minus 2 by 0.5 to calculate a 1-point deduction. Finally, it's important to know that you enter each majority deduction as a positive value, as demonstrated earlier in this tutorial. The judge's detail report will display each entered value as a negative 2, presumably to show that it multiplied minus 2 by the factor to arrive at the deducted points. But don't let this confuse you. If you enter the values as negative values, it will not work. So in summary, let's review the important points learned from this lesson. A deduction value represents a single occurrence of a violation, and entered deduction values do not always directly correlate to the deducted points. In general, enter most deductions by deduction value, not deducted points. Remember though, that deductions that have a point value greater or less than 1, but still use a default factor of 1, will need to be entered by their point value. If this still seems confusing, simply use the IJS Deductions reference sheet, which will be available on Accounting Central, and be sure to use the entered value column for each deduction. Enter all majority deductions as positive numbers, and always enter the music requirements violation as a 2, regardless of level. And remember, the ISUCalc Elements window only displays the entered deduction value. To see the actual deducted points, you'll want to use the judge's detail report. If you have any questions or need further assistance with deductions, first, be sure you've thoroughly read through the release notes. We put a lot of effort into creating these notes and try to explain all the important changes that accountants need to know for each release, so please take the time to read through them. If you still need help, contact your sectional vice chair and/or you're always welcome to send me an email and I'll be happy to assist you. I hope you found this US figure skating learning tutorial useful.